In today's video, destructive testing, I killed a couple windows. We're going to see if we can find some differences. I did some destructive testing yesterday on the 3 most common windows sold in America, and I'm hoping we can extrapolate from the tests I did to how these might perform in the real world. So today we're going to be focusing specifically on vinyl windows, composite windows, that's a plastic wood composite, and number 3, fiberglass windows. All right, so the first test that I did on these windows was I cut a corner section on all 3 of these different frames. I wanted to see the inside of the window, how they were built, what the corners look like, and take a look at that specifically. So first, let's look at the vinyl window. If you look at this corner section on the vinyl, you'll notice first that there's a bunch of ragged edges. That's where the vinyl melted from that saw blade coming through, which tells me right away I have a feeling this vinyl is going to melt at a pretty low temperature. The next thing I notice when I look at this is the corners. You know, there's no sealant in the corner of a vinyl window. The way they're built is vinyl has a fairly low melt temperature, so they put a hot knife on that corner and they actually press the 2 sections together. Now when they're done with that, they're going to take a saw and cut that corner off, and this corner looks good, but look at this corner straight from the factory. It looks to me like there's actually a leak in this window, and if we actually sight down through there, ooh, I can see some light through there. So this window probably came right from the factory with as a leaky window. Not good. That's one of the downsides of a vinyl window. The other thing I'm noticing on here is the finish. Very thin, it actually scratched a little bit. We'll get into that in a minute. Next corner section, let's look at the composite window. This is a vinyl and wood composite. And this one actually, it looks to me like it's a much better built corner. I'm seeing some sealant, maybe some adhesive in there, something to strengthen the corner. That one looks like it's not going to leak from the factory. You'll also notice those ragged edges. That's where that plastic has melted when that saw blade came through. But you can see the wood fibers in there too. Kind of interesting. I'm assuming the wood is going to add some strength to this window. Last cross section, this is our fiberglass window. No ragged edges on this. You can see a little bit of the fibers from those glass fibers that are reinforcing this. Kind of looks like a boat hull if you were to slice a boat open. Just like the other window, I'm noticing that there's some adhesive in the corner section and some mechanical fastening. That looks like that's a good, nice, tight, watertight seal from the get-go. Okay, next, probably the most fun test I did was I did some heat testing. I used a couple of different torches on these 3 different window styles, and I wanted to see what the heat would do to them. First, the vinyl window. I started with just a butane torch. That's kind of the same as your lighter. And just with a little bit of heat, I saw in that window, boy, that window would bend and flex even with a minor amount of heat. Next up, the composite window. When I torched this one, very similar to the vinyl, in fact, maybe even a slightly lower temperature to melt or bend or flex. I'm not entirely sure. But interestingly enough, with the wood fibers in there, this one tore very easily as I was torching it. And then lastly, the fiberglass window. You know, I tried to make a head-to-head comparison on how much heat I was using, and in fact, I switched partway through from the butane torch to MAP gas. That's one of the hottest ones you can get. That's probably 1,500, 2,000 degrees, and I ran each sample for 4 or 5 seconds, and then I pushed on them to see how flexible they were. Of course, the vinyl and the composite, we could bend those right away. It didn't take much heat at all, and those things were moving. The fiberglass, on the other hand, even with 5 seconds of MAP gas, that's crazy high heat, I still couldn't push on it. Very, very strong. How do we extrapolate that to the real world? What's the takeaway for your house for that? You know, we've got heat deflection at a fairly low temperature for both vinyl and the composite window, where the fiberglass, much, much stronger. It's going to take the heat better. I'm in Texas, and if you're in the South, this is something you should be worried about. I had a house several years ago that had vinyl windows, and I noticed within a few short years, I had some amount of sag on that upper sash, such that I couldn't lock them without a ton of force. That also means that in time, we're going to have some loss of energy efficiency. They're not going to seal very well. Okay, and the last takeaway on this heat test, I think, is the expansion and contraction. You're going to notice that on the vinyl and the composite window, the heat is going to make those things expand and contract. It looks to me like that fiberglass, even with some really high heat, is going to stay rock solid. Very impressive. Next up, let's talk about the finish on the outside of the windows. You know, that was one of the things I noticed right away on this vinyl window is the paint film on the outside of the window, very, very thin. It was scratching really easily. In fact, this had some scratches right from the factory. Not a very durable finish, and that's my experience as well. A house that I had vinyl windows years ago, my dog scratching on the door to get out within the first month was scratching all the way back to that bare vinyl. If you're going to choose vinyl windows, I wouldn't do a paint finish on the outside. You might consider doing either white or the tan color that comes, because a paint finish is not going to be very durable on those. Okay, next, the composite window. Now this one seems to have some thickness on the outside. If you look at this cross section where I cut it, it actually looks like it's going to hold up pretty well. When I put a knife on this one, it did much, much better than the vinyl window. In fact, we could scratch it multiple times and we'd still have the color. So that one's got some better finish on the outside of the window. And then lastly, this fiberglass window. Now this is a fiberglass window by Marvin. This is their all Ultrex version, and this was probably the thickest capstock on the outside. This one we could scratch it up nice with my knife and it didn't come through. Eventually you will get through that if you're really bearing down on your knife, but this one did real well. I think this one's going to hold up real well on the outside of a house. Okay, last up, impact resistance. This is one I had to scratch my head on a little bit. How could I simulate hail hitting these frames after a couple years, maybe in a cold winter day, or maybe after they've had a few years of sun exposure? So here's what I try to do. I put a bag of ice in the corner of each one of these three windows to try and cool them down a little bit. And then I drop some small rocks on them like hail. And actually the small rocks I did okay. So then I moved up to a bigger rock. I really wanted to make sure we got some test results. And what I found very interesting, you know, the vinyl window, when we dropped the rock on it, it would chip, but it actually did fairly well in this test, better than I expected. I've seen some vinyl windows that have taken a hailstorm and have actually had some pock marks on them. My assumption is over time that sun is going to make that vinyl more brittle and is going to break it down. But this new window actually did pretty well in the impact. The most interesting result, though, I thought was this. This is our composite window. I expected that wood plastic composite to do better because the wood fibers would strengthen it. But boy, one rock throw on this, and this thing showed, whoo, it's pretty brittle. We made a giant hole in this window frame. I don't think that'd be very easy to repair with that size hole. And it flaked off from there pretty easily as well. So this one seems like it actually probably did the worst in the test. And then lastly, the fiberglass. You know, the fiberglass held up pretty well, just like a boat hull with those fiberglass glass strands in there. It's got a lot of strength. I was able to crack that, but it looks like it'd be a repair that would actually be fixable. Just like if you had a damage on your boat, you could repair that. So very impressive result from the fiberglass. All right, so what are the takeaways? Obviously, these tests are a little bit extreme. You're not going to put a MAP gas torch on your windows. But I think what you're going to find is that with these tests, it's really kind of showing the quality differences between these three windows. I think when it comes to vinyl and the composite windows, you might actually get less than what you pay for. When you buy a fiberglass window, you're totally getting what you're paying for. It's totally worth a little extra money for a good window like this. And remember, these tests were on brand new windows for a short period of time. Think about what Mother Nature is going to dish out over the next couple decades on your windows, and I think you'll see it's really an easy choice to go to fiberglass. Thanks for joining me, guys. This was sure a fun video to make. Hit that subscribe button below for more content like this. Every Tuesday we're publishing the Rogue Show. Every Friday we're publishing the Build Show. And if you hit that subscribe button, you're going to get notified. And also, when you hit subscribe, hit the bell next to that. That's going to notify you either on your phone or an email of new content so you can stay up to date with us. Big thanks to our show sponsors. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Otherwise, we'll see you next Friday on the Build Show.